He fixed tires while others fixed their prejudices. She drove past 100 mechanics that morning, but stopped for the one they said didn't belong. When the leather briefcase hit the pavement, everything they thought they knew about power, kindness, and invisible connections shattered. Sometimes the smallest gesture unlocks the biggest truth. The morning fog hung thick over Chicago's south side like a gray shroud, muffling the distant hum of rush-hour traffic. Marcus Bentley wiped his oil-stained hands on a threadbare cloth, the familiar weight of another invisible day settling on his shoulders. 37 years old, shoulders broad from lifting engines, eyes that had learned to look past the casual cruelties that slid off tongues like rain off windows. The scent of motor oil and old coffee mixed with the metallic bite of approaching winter air. His small auto shop squatted between a laundromat and a corner store, the kind of place people drove past without seeing, the kind of man they assumed belonged exactly where he was and nowhere else. A sleek black SUV lurched to the curb, its chrome gleaming against the dull morning light. The driver's side door opened with the soft thud of expensive engineering, and out stepped a young white woman in a designer coat that probably cost more than Marcus made in 2 months. She stood beside her vehicle like a lost bird, staring down at her flat tire with the helpless expression of someone who had never touched anything greasier than a salad fork. Her breath formed small clouds in the cold air as pedestrians slowed their pace, glanced over, then kept walking. "Let her figure it out," someone muttered. "Probably has AAA anyway." Marcus watched the subtle dance of urban indifference play out before him. The woman pulled out her phone, scrolled through contacts with manicured fingers that trembled slightly in the cold. She glanced around, her gaze sliding past him like he was part of the scenery. A fire hydrant, a lamppost, another piece of infrastructure that existed, but didn't matter. The morning light caught the anxiety in her eyes, the way she kept checking her expensive watch, the nervous energy that radiated from her like heat from a broken radiator. "Need some help with that tire, miss?" Marcus's voice cut through the fog, steady and calm. She startled, actually jumped a little, as if surprised that the landscape had spoken to her. Her eyes darted over him quickly, taking in his worn Carhartt jacket, the grease under his fingernails, the small shop behind him with its faded sign and oil-stained concrete. He could see the calculation happening behind her eyes, the brief war between desperation and distrust, between need and the voice in her head that whispered about strangers in strange neighborhoods. Yes, actually. Thank you." Her voice was crisp, educated, with the kind of accent that came from private schools and summer houses. She barely made eye contact, her gaze fixed somewhere over his left shoulder. "I have a meeting downtown in an hour, and my regular mechanic is in Evanston," Marcus finished gently, knowing the geography of separation that kept people like her from places like this until emergencies forced temporary border crossings. He was already walking toward his shop, retrieving his jack and tire iron, with movements that spoke of 30 years of unexpected roadside theology. "We'll get you back on the road quick." As he worked, her phone rang constantly, a symphony of importance that seemed to surround her like an invisible force field. She paced while he loosened lug nuts, her heels clicking against the broken sidewalk in an anxious rhythm. "Yes, I understand the briefing is at 10. No, tell them I'll be there. The president's daughter doesn't keep people waiting." The words tumbled out in a stream of harried authority, each syllable sharp with stress and expectation. Marcus's hands never paused, but something in his chest tightened at the casual mention of power that moved through marble hallways while he moved through motor oil. He'd learned long ago not to ask questions about the lives that intersected his for 20 minutes before driving away to places he'd never see. He checked her brake pads out of habit, tested the tire pressure on her other wheels, added a splash of windshield washer fluid because her reservoir was nearly empty. Small acts of completeness that cost him nothing but time, the kind of thoroughness that had earned him a reputation in the neighborhood as someone who did things right the first time. The SUV was ready in 15 minutes. She stood beside the driver's door, fumbling through her purse for her wallet, when the leather briefcase slipped from her grip and hit the concrete with a soft thud. Marcus bent to retrieve it, his fingers closing around expensive leather that smelled like power and privilege. And that's when he saw it, the official seal embossed in gold, the words, "Executive Office of the President," stamped beneath an eagle that seemed to stare directly at him. Time stopped. The fog seemed to thicken, muffling even the distant sound of traffic. Emily Wilson, the president's daughter. The woman whose face he'd seen on news programs discussing policy initiatives and charity galas, always surrounded by security details and red carpets. She was standing on a broken sidewalk in his neighborhood, accepting help from a man whose existence had never registered in her world until this moment of mechanical vulnerability. Her eyes followed his gaze to the briefcase, and he watched her face change. The mask of anonymous politeness replaced by something more complex, more human. Recognition. Not of him, but of the moment they both suddenly understood they were sharing. The careful distance she'd maintained began to crack like ice under spring pressure. "Thank you," she said again, but this time she looked directly at him. "Really, I don't know what I would have done." Marcus straightened, still holding her briefcase, and that's when her gaze caught on the thin chain around his neck, the small medallion that had hung there for 15 years. She stepped closer, squinting at the tarnished silver disc that bore the photograph of a young man in navy dress whites, his smile bright and proud beneath his military cap. "That's—" her voice caught. "Can I see that?" He lifted the chain over his head and placed it gently in her palm. She stared at the photograph, her thumb tracing the edges of the frame, and when she looked up at him again, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "This is my Uncle David," she whispered. "He died in Afghanistan 12 years ago." The pieces of an impossible puzzle began clicking into place. Marcus nodded slowly, his throat suddenly tight. "Lieutenant David Chen. He visited my mom in the hospital when I was 17. Covered her surgery when our insurance wouldn't. Said he knew what it was like to be far from home and need help from strangers." His voice grew softer, reverent. "She kept his business card taped to her bathroom mirror until the day she died. 'Remember the Navy man,' she'd tell me. 'Remember that kindness travels in circles.'" Emily's composure cracked completely. She pressed the medallion to her chest, her designer coat suddenly looking like armor that couldn't protect her from the weight of unexpected connection. "He never told us about that, about helping people outside the family." She was quiet for a long moment, studying Marcus's face as if seeing him for the first time. What do you do when you're not rescuing stranded motorists?" Marcus gestured toward his small shop with a slight smile that carried years of deferred dreams. "I keep cars running. Been talking about opening a training program for kids in the neighborhood, teach them real skills. But talk is cheap and good intentions don't pay for equipment." He shrugged, the gesture carrying the weight of a dozen abandoned business plans and loan applications that had died quiet deaths in bankers' offices. "After my wife passed, I needed something steady for my boy. Reliable income beats big dreams when you're paying for school clothes and keeping the lights on." He looked at the medallion in her hands, then back at her face. "Your uncle understood that. Said sometimes the best thing you can do is show up where you're needed, even if it's not where you thought you'd be." 2 weeks later, Marcus stood in front of a gleaming new building that smelled of fresh paint and possibility. The sign above the entrance read, "Bentley Auto Academy," in letters that caught the morning sun like promises made real. The $250,000 in combined federal grants and private Wilson family funding had transformed a vacant lot into something that looked like hope given physical form. Emily arrived for the opening ceremony without the usual security detail, dressed in jeans and work boots instead of designer suits. She helped distribute tools to the first class of 15 teenagers, their faces bright with the particular excitement that comes from learning something useful with your hands. Marcus watched her move through the space with easy grace, asking questions about carburetor engines and brake systems like she actually cared about the answers. During a quiet moment between demonstrations, she approached his son Jerome, a gangly 16-year-old who had inherited his father's steady hands and his mother's quick smile. Without ceremony, she pressed something small into his palm, the tarnished medallion on its thin chain. "This belonged to someone who understood that kindness doesn't disappear," she told him quietly. "It just waits for the right moment to circle back around. Your father has been carrying that moment for 15 years. Jerome looked down at the photograph of the young officer, then up at his father, understanding passing between them like electricity through copper wire. Marcus felt something tight in his chest finally release, a knot of old grief and new gratitude that he hadn't even known he'd been carrying. As the ceremony wound down and parents began collecting their excited teenagers, Emily lingered near the entrance. The late afternoon light slanted through the large windows, casting everything in warm gold that made the new space feel lived in and loved. He would have been proud, she said, not needing to specify which he she meant. Uncle David always said the best investments are the ones that pay dividends in people. Marcus nodded, running his hand along the smooth surface of a workbench that still smelled like sawdust and fresh beginnings. Funny how things connect. Your family's been helping mine longer than either of us knew. Emily smiled, the expression transforming her face into something softer than the careful political mask she usually wore. Maybe that's how it's supposed to work. Maybe we're all connected in ways we don't see until we're ready to look. The building emptied gradually, voices and footsteps fading into the comfortable quiet of evening settling over the neighborhood. Marcus stood alone in the space that had been born from a flat tire and a fallen briefcase, from the intersection of need and availability that had changed two lives in the space of 15 minutes on a foggy morning. Through the windows, he could see lights beginning to twinkle across the south side, families gathering for dinner, homework being started at kitchen tables, the ordinary magic of another day ending and another about to begin. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with text messages from parents asking about enrollment, from teenagers wanting to know when the next class would start, from a future that suddenly felt as real and solid as the tools hanging on the pegboard behind him. He pulled out his wallet and retrieved a creased business card, Lieutenant David Chen, U.S. Navy, that had been tucked behind his driver's license for 15 years. The edges were soft with handling, the print faded but still legible. Tomorrow, he would frame it and hang it near the entrance, a reminder that kindness planted in one season could bloom in another, that the help we give to strangers might be the help we need ourselves, delivered by hands we don't recognize until the iwa moment they reach for us across the space where all our careful separations dissolve into something simpler and more true. Talent doesn't ask permission from prejudice. Remember that the next time you're tempted to look past someone who might be exactly the person you need,